So I'm actually pretty late putting out this video, but things have developed slightly since then. So before you hear this diatribe, essentially, the point is that I had to pay £1,750 for 10 nights stay in a Holiday Inn that usually charges £50 a night. That's now been increased by the government to £2,250, about that, for 10 nights, which is a lot. And they say that the increase in price is justified because of the logistics behind it, but if you watch the rest of the video, the logistics is fairly shambolic, and I'm sure there's other costs that I'm not aware of, but it just doesn't seem to add up, and you're paying an inflated price for hotel quarantine. Now, there's loads of caveats. There's obviously a deterrent to travel to red list countries. For me personally, I made a mistake by not knowing the rules of transiting through various airports, and there's still a need to protect the UK, I guess. But in essence, it's the most expensive hotel I've ever stayed in by a long way, probably the worst experience in a hotel, and it just made me question where the costs are going. So if you don't want to watch any further, then that's pretty much it, but there's some stories and a bit more detail as to why I just can't believe that they're charging that amount of money. If it was more reasonable, I really wouldn't have a problem with it. Okay, I made it. End of hotel quarantine, bags are packed. Last morning, just about to enjoy my breakfast, and I was sort of umming and ahhing about making this, but I think it would be interesting for people, especially if you're coming back to the UK, because at least for me it's been a bit of a shambles. Few caveats first. One, I don't make macro policies. I don't envy any politician that's having to make these decisions, so I appreciate it's hard. Secondly, these things are reasonably large scale, so people here are working, but I have a few complaints. And third one is that this is just a good old-fashioned whinge, so take it for what it is. I'm pretty salty about it, and I've tried to be as objective as possible, but yeah, as I said, it hasn't worked out for me particularly well. Probably a bit frustrated. So, for those of you that might not know, as with a lot of countries, if you travel abroad, they're on like a tier list. We have green, amber, red. So green, I believe you can come back and not quarantine. Amber, you can come back and quarantine, although I think they're changing the policy so that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine. And then red, you have to come back, book a hotel quarantine through a government approved hotel, and it'll cost you £1,750 for 10 nights, which is not a small amount of money. So I'll cover the first part, which is why I was surprised. I actually was supposed to be away for another 4 to 6 months, but I came back early before Indonesia went on the red list to avoid hotel quarantine, but I'm here. So how did that happen? I got to Jakarta and was informed that because I'm flying through Doha, i.e. Qatar, and I was connecting less than 2 hours, and because new people could get on the plane, suddenly I've effectively been in a red list country and I had to book a hotel, which was a little bit surprising, especially since everybody has to test negative to get into the airport and get on the plane. Regardless, that whole shenanigans was annoying. The annoying thing for me was that I appreciate that the UK are trying to reduce the amount of infected people coming into the country and the variants, but the reality is that the variants are already here, and when I arrived there was about 50,000 cases a day, new cases a day in the UK, yet they opened pretty much everything up. People can go to nightclubs. It felt a bit like the red list quarantine hotel rule has lagged behind the rest of the UK's policy domestically. I don't quite understand why I had to pay such a fee instead of just doing it at home. And to put it into perspective, I'm in a Holiday Inn. Usually these rooms are £50 to £60. I spoke to one guy who booked it 2 years ago in advance, paid £33 a night. Yet, if you average it out, I'm paying £175 a night. Doesn't quite work. Okay, so you get 2 tests that you have to do, but you can order them, they're £100. So you're still paying 3 to 4 times the usual amount for a Holiday Inn, which for those Americans, it's not quite a Motel 6, but it's not exactly the Sheraton or a 4 or 5 star hotel. So that one was quite strange, especially since you spend all of your time in the room, so there's no need for staff. They don't clean your room, so they clean a room every 10 days. So it just felt like a bit of a money grab. It felt like a complete money grab, and I'm sure that a study will come out at some point, exposing the amount of money that these contracts have made. It felt ridiculous. And it also felt ridiculous just being a citizen, as nationalistic and patriotic as that sounds, but to come back home, you're forced to pay this amount, and it's not an insignificant amount. And yes, it sucks for me, but I'm in a lucky position where I had the money to pay it. I imagine a student being abroad, it turns red or goes on the red list. They don't have the money to come back and pay for it, but they don't have the money to stay abroad. And yes, you can defer payment of it, but it's still a significant amount of money, and as I said, 3 or 4 times the amount that this place usually charges. That's first wine over. The bigger part, well, not the bigger part, the part that's made me really salty about this, and I'm not expecting 5-star treatment, not expecting it at all, but it really feels like you're a prisoner. The staff here have been, and I didn't film anybody because I don't think that's appropriate, but there are no, I'm going to sound really old-fashioned here, there's no pleases or thank yous. It's fill this form in, stand there, do this, and you're just shuffled along. It's as if you've committed a crime and you have to be in here. That doesn't help the attitude, especially when most people here are already fairly annoyed at having to be here. The attitude of people, I was standing 20 or 30 meters away from the bus to get here, and some guy turned up. He's like, "You can't be here." I was like, "I'm waiting for the bus." He's like, "Oh, you need an escort." I was like, nobody else has an escort. I don't understand what's going on. If they could just change their tone slightly, I'd be fine, but I don't like being ordered about, maybe. And then when you're here, luckily, I have a full window here. If you can hear the humming in the background, it's because, the aircon units are just below me. So it sounds like you've got the faint hum of a plane behind you all the time. But in terms of the room, I have nothing to complain about. It's completely fine. The issue I have is really the logistical issues and, well, the staff. Don't really want to, oust anybody, but for example, it took me 4 hours to get from the airport to here, which is probably a couple of miles away from the airport. And the bus drivers were complaining about the fact that they were being given a route that didn't make sense. So I was watching it on Google Maps, and they were going up here, back down, back up, back around, back down, which was interesting and something that sort of set the tone for the rest of the stay. If you go downstairs, luckily we're actually allowed out for 20 minutes twice a day to walk around the car park and the small patch of grass, which is great, but you have to get an escort, phone down for an escort, and they don't arrive for an hour and a half. And then you go downstairs and there's 20 people just sitting down in high high-vis vests doing nothing. So that was, again, frustrating. The most worrying part of it was that the person in the room opposite me tested positive. And the reason I know this is because they come round and they deliver your meals. And I was going outside, it was my second trip outside for the day, and I noticed that 3 meals were just stacked up. I'd noticed that the day before, and I said to the security guard, that guy hasn't, eaten or drank anything. He hasn't eaten any of his meals. You should probably check on that. And so they go to the security guard who sits at the desk near the elevators, and he knows that they've tested positive because they write it down on the back of a napkin. I am not joking you. With a felt pen, it's on the back of a napkin, like scrumpled up. Which, it still does its job. Didn't feel very official. So then you've got somebody that's tested positive in a room that hasn't eaten anything. Security guard goes, yeah, I should probably knock on the door. Knocks on the door, no answer. Knocks again, 5 minutes passed, no answer. Gets on the radio, nobody knows what's going on. They know that he's tested positive, but he should be in the room. Obviously, that's quite worrying. The whole reason we're in here is because people are dying. If he's not answering, they know he's tested positive. Nobody's even realised that the meals are just stacking up. People are just dumping the meals as and when they have to. It seemed like a really strange situation to me. Eventually, the manager comes down and says, oh, he's gone to hospital, and then has a go at the security guard for being on the radio so much to try and get some information, which I couldn't believe. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew he had gone to hospital. Nobody knew anything about it. And then the manager tried to make out like it wasn't the right thing to do to call it in, because she was trying to check other people in and the radio was going off. Really, it was her problem. Yeah, it was a situation that could have been really, really bad. And, the guy could have been in there and nobody would have known about it. Nobody would have checked up. They would have just carried on stacking the meals up until somebody went, oh, there's 2 days of meals here. So it was unbelievable. In terms of meals, I wasn't expecting anything really. This is my breakfast: 2 boiled eggs with some, fake cheese, a Muller Lite, fruit bowl, and a croissant. That's pretty much what you get. I wasn't expecting, gourmet food, but that's that's a packed lunch, and you're paying £175 a day. I don't understand what we're paying for. I guess that's why I'm really annoyed. The excuse would be, oh, we need to organise everything, and that's where the cost is. And the organisation is pretty much, it is literally back of a napkin organisation. So nothing I can do about it. A warning to anybody that might be coming here, what to expect. I've seen videos of people that don't even have a full window. They have a tiny one up in the skylight and they're not allowed out. So I'm lucky in the fact that I had a semi-decent room. Didn't get to pick my hotel. There was only one thing. That might be an availability issue on the website, but yeah, be glad to get out of here. Complain. Jesus, I probably came across a bit stuck up there. I hope it didn't. I hope it doesn't get taken out of context. The context is fairly clear in that I came back, going through Doha was my fault. I didn't realise that transiting was effectively entering a country. That was my fault. I didn't know the rules, but with the backdrop of Boris opening up and allowing people to go to nightclubs and no mask mandates and all of that, it just seemed ridiculous to be charged nearly £2,000 to stay in a hotel that costs 30 to 50, maybe £60 a night. Okay, that's it. Done. I'm out.